This gets into more of the fun, creative stuff behind retailing. So the reason that merchandise buying and management is obviously so important in our field is because merchandise is the heart of the business. And the inventory that you purchase and make available can make or break any type of business venture you have. So when we get into what buying really is, there's a lot of ideas out in popular culture and myths and misconceptions. And so it's important to talk about what it is and what it isn't. First of all, merchandise presents a variety of challenges when it comes to apparel and textile retailing. So remember back when we talked about products and we had that very basic discussion about types of products? Well, this is where that really comes into play, because remember, you have staple products and then you also have fashion products. So with apparel, we're not really dealing with staple product at all. We're talking about merchandise that can become obsolete. So you're going to have things turn over multiple times with things like color, silhouette, and fabric. So there's a lot of very in-depth knowledge that you have to have in order to be a successful buyer. How many of you think that buying currently sounds like an interesting career path? Okay, so a good number of you are interested in that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the hard and fast reality of buying. I want to encourage you to follow and pursue what you want to do, but I also want to tell you the reality of what buying is. So even when you plan merchandise to sell in a retailer, your best laid plans often fail. And this isn't necessarily because you haven't done your research, but the market trends might just go in a different direction. Sometimes research isn't going to accurately predict. So you might have a, for example, wrong color selection. And people don't like this color, so it results in markdowns. And that's going to affect your overall profit. Because it affects the overall profit and the long-term goals of the business, buying positions are extremely vulnerable. So when you are a buyer, there is very little room for error. And so, for example, I have friends, and I also know several people who have been in buying positions, and they joke and say that you're part of the network of buyers because you might make one wrong decision one season, get let go, and then go join another retailer, and it just kind of cycles through with people with buying experience. So if you make more than the allowable number of purchase errors, you will be let go from your job pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that you have accurate research information to inform what you're doing all the time. So what is the role of an apparel and textile buyer? So as we talked about, there's lots of ideas about what it is, but this is the heart and soul of the position. You are seeking appropriate merchandise for your target customer. And so in this way, you get to be creative in a business-oriented job. You are also responsible for purchasing and pricing the merchandise. Often, people don't completely realize that when you are a buyer, you price the merchandise as well, but this is one of your tasks. You also get to do a little bit of visual merchandising as well in this job. So you get to assign floor space to specific lines or collections based upon the amount of product that you've ordered. You also get to select which merchandise will be chosen for visual presentation, say in store windows or at the front of the store when you first walk in. And maybe also what will get a promotional price as well. And then lastly, and one of the reasons that you're working in groups, as we've talked about multiple times, you have to know how to manage and collaborate with other personnel in the business. This is really key because you're talking to people all the time. So you have to do tasks like calculate the size of a purchase. You have to decide which vendors or brands you are going to buy from. You need to determine when inventory needs to be reordered. So is something selling unusually fast? If so, reorder. And then you also need to project sales and future inventory needs. So when you are seeking this position, just to give you a sense of the job market outlook for this, the average growth in the retail buyer segment up until 2022 is 4%. So this is an extremely competitive position to get. So how do you stand out? Of all the buyers that I know and have talked to, the greatest way to get into this position is to know people and to do an internship or on-the-job training. So those are things that you really want to seek out if you're interested in this. Once you're in at a company, it generally takes approximately 5 years to achieve a full buyer status. So you might work as a sales associate first, and then you might get bumped up to some type of floor manager, and then an assistant buyer, and then a buyer, depending on the trajectory of the retailer. Most buying positions require that you have a bachelor's degree minimum and at least 1 year of on-the-job training. And they require that you have critical thinking skills, strong math skills, and that you can negotiate well with others. So if those are things that you feel like you might need a little practice with, those would be things to work on as you develop your professional image. So now that you know the tasks, what's the process for buying merchandise? How do we go about this? So there's 7 steps to this process, and over the course of today and then Thursday, we're going to talk through this process. You're actually going to go through each of these 7 steps with your simulated store. So the very last thing you're going to do the last week of the semester is jump to monitoring and evaluating the performance that you have. But in order to get there, we have to start at the beginning. So we start with forecasting sales. You also do other category forecasting, such as trends and any type of economic climate changes. So is there a recession? What's kind of happening in society at the moment? Then the next thing is to develop an assortment plan. So you need to decide how much of your store is going to be allocated to women's wear or men's wear. So you're going to break that down, and we're going to talk about how you do that. Then you need to determine exactly how much inventory you need of your assortment. And this also includes determining if the product is available. So are you going to have back stock, kind of a backup in case it sells quickly if you think it will, or are you going to do a small quantity just to test it out? And then step 4 is to develop your plan for managing inventory. And that's primarily what we're going to talk about more on Thursday, but we'll get into it a little bit today. Next, you need to determine where the merchandise is going. So if you have multiple retail locations, for a bigger store, they're going to have a wider assortment than a store with a smaller square footage. Then you get to buy your merchandise. So this is where you start crunching numbers a lot. And then you get to your last step where you need to look at what you've accomplished and make plans for the next sales cycle. And then it all repeats, and this happens multiple times a year. So this could happen as many as 8 to 9 times a year for a retailer. It's a very fast-paced world. So we begin with merchandise planning and forecasting. Now, remember when we talked about research and how we emphasized that so much towards the start of the semester? Well, this is one of the reasons. You need to have adequate research data in order to forecast and plan your merchandise assortment. This is what helps to make you successful. So you start by looking at previous sales data. You need to look at all of the details of this. So you need to look at the sales broken down by vendor, broken down by things like style and color, and also size. So when you get to the point that your merchandise has been distributed to different retail locations within your business, you have to unpack it, and then you sort it, and then you have to tag it, because it then goes into a record-keeping system. And this system is how you keep track of your previous sales data. So you examine this sales data multiple times during the season, and then also, of course, at the end. And this is the primary source of future planning for any retailer. As they say, numbers don't lie. So that's where sales data really comes into play. Next is your market research. So this is where you use the techniques that we've talked about before in class, like surveys and focus groups. You could also use interviews. And the reason behind doing this is that you're getting the customer preference related to what merchandise you should acquire. So in addition to looking at the previous history of your business, you're now incorporating customer needs and wants into your buying plan. And that's key, because another common phrase, the customer is always right, in this case, They are, because they dictate what you sell. So once you've taken these measures, looking at previous sales data and market research, then you go into what are called external sources for forecasting and planning. So these would be resident buying offices and fashion trend and reporting services. So a resident buying office is really it's become known in more recent years as a market consultant firm. And what they do is they exist as a big conglomerate, and they directly merchandise and purchase the product for a retailer. So it's kind of the middleman in the retail process. It's kind of like a retailer having a personal assistant to go and do chores for them. So they might also have premium services that they offer, such as visiting fashion market weeks in various cities, like Dallas, Texas, or Las Vegas has a big one as well. They might also preview collections for you so that you can then get information about what is new and coming out and decide if you want to get in on that. And then this consultant firm also stays in close communication with the buyer. So you can see on the slide here, this is a screenshot of the kind of the mission and the purpose of one such resident buying office. They are the most well-known in the United States, the Doniger Group. And they really, truly are the global leader in buying. So one thing you might want to do if you're interested in the buying process is go and look at their website. And I am going to post other examples of the resident buying offices so that you can see examples of those as well. And they detail a lot of what they do on their websites. They also will share some kind of generic trend reports that you can get a sense of what they do without purchasing their service. So you can get a glimpse into it. Another buying office is called Marshall Klein. This is a popular one in the United States as well. And then you have your fashion trend and reporting services. So this is when you are subscribing to services that give you up-to-date information about trends. And this is up-to-date in terms of daily and weekly, so it's quite often. So it'll feature things about current trends and things that are hot sellers currently in retail. And also the names of vendors where certain trends can be found. One of the good things about fashion trend and reporting services is that they can help you to quickly adjust your inventory. So if you find that a trend is happening and you want to phase out some of your inventory and add in others related to trends, you can do that relatively quickly. So an example of a reporting service that you might encounter in your work is the Retail Reporting Bureau. And then you also have your regular fashion magazines like Harper's Bazaar and Vogue. Retailers also consult these publications as well as what are known as trade publications, such as California Apparel News that you see on the slide here. And again, these are things that you probably want to become familiar with as a resource. And so go and explore them on the internet and see exactly what they provide to retailers. Part of what you're going to need to do for your merchandise management plan is to look at a Trendo reporting service. And I will give you more information about how you have access to that, because you do. But for now, just know that it's good to have this knowledge. So you've done your planning and forecasting. Now you need to get organized before you create your assortment plan. Before you can create your assortment plan, you need to have a very organized system for your merchandise classification. And every retailer is going to do something a little bit different when it comes to how they group their merchandise. But the basic structure is going to be the same across retailers, and that's what you're seeing on the slide. So this is actually detailed in your textbook as a visual graphic, but just as a description of these categories, the most broad is the merchandise group. So this is when you determine the broad categories of your product offerings, either by customer type or by the scenario for which they will wear it. So for example, you might have a merchandise group set as women's apparel, or men's apparel, or intimate apparel. If you have a seasonal store, which some of you did for your retail concepts, you might even have things like swimwear or ski wear. And then for department, this is really more of a managerial term to help manage the assortment plan. So you have divisional merchandise managers that handle each of the departments related to merchandise groups. So the department then manages the classification, category, and style. A classification is a group of items targeting the same customer type. So, for example, you might have different classifications for different groupings of sizes. You might have petite, and you might have Mrs., and then you might have women's or plus size. There's a lot of different ways you can group categories, or classifications, excuse me. But this is one of the most common ways, by customer type and size. And then next is category. So this is the type of product within a classification. For example, you might have dresses and outerwear that are included in your petite women's classification. One of the easiest ways to remember this and think about it with regard to categories is that it's an assortment of items that customers see as a substitution for one another. So let's say that you go into a store and you need to find a dress or some type of formal sorority event. Now, you're going to go into a retailer and see a selection of dresses, But they're going to be different vendors, different colors, different styles. But really, you could substitute one out for another. They just have different characteristics. However, you would not go into the athletic wear department or classification to find that product. So you could not substitute that for one another. And then at the most minute of details, you have the style. So these are the specific looks within a classification. So style is going to be different design features. For example, if you have a classification that includes skirts for different casual wear, you might have denim skirts that are mini, denim skirts that are ankle length. So these are the specific attributes and styles related to a classification. Now, remember how back a couple weeks ago we talked about the SKU. So what does SKU stand for again? Yes, stock keeping unit. I heard the answer. Okay, so write down stock keeping unit in your notes, because this is going to become very important after you've completed your financial plan for the project and move forward with your merchandise management. So a stock keeping unit is the smallest unit available for your inventory control. It designates the group, classification, category, and style all on one tag. So that's why we now come back to SKU. It relates back to our work with how we move forward in the retail process. So we've got our organization in place. Now we need to develop an assortment plan. One of the things that's most important about an inventory assessment when you're making an assortment plan is proportion. So you need to decide in what quantity you are going to incorporate different products. Are you going to have one category of inventory that has a very high proportion, and that's kind of your high seller? Are you just going to have moderate quantities of a bunch of different products? Or will you engage in some more trendy aspects of retail and purchase what we call small or test quantities? So this is if you're not quite sure exactly what's happening with a trend and you want to try it out, but in a safe way. And again, all of this information is based on the buyer's knowledge of trends and consumer preferences. This is where your sales will also come into play, because you don't want to order too much or too little. So you want to look at what those sales trends have been in the past. The next most important part of an assortment plan is category variety and assortment. So this brings us back to some other terms that we established earlier in the semester as well. Remember, we talked about breadth and depth. So who can review for us from a couple weeks ago, what is breadth?
How wide your assortment is.
Say that one more time.
How wide your assortment is.
Yeah, so the breadth is going to be the width of your assortment or the variety. And then your depth is going to be what?
How many things are in that category?
Yes, exactly. So this is going to be the SKUs that are in that category. And so you can think of that in a vertical, the breadth is kind of the horizontal line, and the depth is going to be your vertical line. So you can see here, this is an example on the slide of Under Armour's assortment plan. And they have got everything pieced out for these short sleeve tops and shorts by color. And they have things like the size range, the fabric, and all of these are broken down into different SKUs. So this looks like a pretty complicated process. How do we actually get to this point? This next part of developing your assortment plan is what we call editing the assortment. So when you edit the assortment, you are determining the variety and assortment for a category. And you do this across all the categories that you have. Your textbook actually provides one of the best and most clear examples of how to organize this information. And so this will probably be helpful to you in your project. So this is an example from the textbook of an assortment plan for girls' jeans. So let's walk through how to interpret this. So you can see that there are 10 types of variety related to style. So there's different skinny options and there's different boot cut options. Okay. Now for each type, there's going to be 81 different SKUs. So how did I get there? There are 3 colors for each of these varieties. And then there's going to be 9 sizes for each of them and 3 different lengths. So I'm going to multiply 3 colors by 9 sizes by 3 lengths. And so by doing this, the retailer will then plan to offer 810 individual SKUs in the girls' jeans. So you're actually going to create an assortment plan. Yours does not have to be nearly as broad as this for your project because you're going to do a smaller scale of product to sell. But this gives you an idea of how you can visually organize the information. One of the things about assortment plans is just like any other industry right now, there's a lot of software coming out and most of it is very industrial and expensive, so retailers purchase licenses for it. We don't actually have access to this software, and so we're going to be more creative in how we organize our information. But I wanted to show you some examples of how other retailers organize assortment plans. So this is an example of one that was done for Target. And you can see they have it broken down by coats, jackets, dresses, skirts, pants, shirts, tops. And then you have your styles and how many sizes and the colors. So I actually think that this is a really good way to organize the information because it helps you keep track of exactly what you're doing. And then it moves into the cost, which we're not going to do pricing for another couple weeks, but you do want to pay attention right now to those first two columns. So your workwear department assortment can also be represented in a table format with images in this way. So if you're more visually oriented, then you might want to organize your assortment plan like this. And you're going to have access to all of these examples. Another way you can do it that some people find really effective is to organize it. This left example was done in PowerPoint. And you can do the actual product, each one on a slide, and then indicate fabrication, fabric, and then the sizes and the color swatches all together on one. Another way to do it is in Excel. And because Excel is an incredibly important skill for retailing, I would recommend playing with Excel in this way because when I talk to former students and professionals in industry, one of the top things they say is you have to know how to use Excel with ease. So that's one skill you want to brush up on if you don't feel comfortable with Excel currently. And then after you have your assortment plan in place, our last topic for today is model stock development. So the purpose of making an assortment plan is that you're going to build a model stock plan. And this is, it's sort of that sweet spot of the desired or appropriate assortment of merchandise. Remember that fashion items are always seasonal in nature, well, for the most part. And so this is a really challenging task to create a model stock plan. So your model stock, if you think about it from more of a numbers perspective, it is the number of each SKU in your assortment plan that the buyer wants to have available for purchase. So your textbook provides a good example, again here, of a really organized table related to model stocks. So if we interpret this, you can see that there are 9 units of the size 1 short, and this actually represents 2% of those 429 total units. And this is all broken down in your textbook as well, and so if you need to review how to interpret this, just consult your textbook. And the number of your SKUs is going to vary, as we talked about, based on the available space in your store. And so the amount of space you have available is one of the key considerations in your model stock plan. And the last key piece about model stock is that you need to think about choosing complementary merchandise. So this is really important for your project because you're working with a curated retail concept. And the buyer's task fits into this scenario nicely, because when you are buying merchandise, you need to think about how it complements each other so that you can raise the total check or receipt average. So for example, if I went into a store and I needed to buy, I was gonna buy some new trousers that were trendy now, and I was gonna wear them to work, I would expect that a store would also have a jacket that would complement it, as well as some type of blouse or shirt. So then I have a range of complementary merchandise that I can offer. And not only can I visually merchandise it together, but I can help to build a relationship with my customer in the process. So there's a lot of key reasons why that's important. And then you also have to keep in mind sizes as well. What's interesting is that retailers often look at geographic and demographic information related to the average size of citizens in different towns and cities. So you might notice if you travel to the East Coast that the range of sizes is different than what you see locally available, and that's why. So that is where we are going to stop for today when it comes to merchandise management and assortment. So